Welcome into Real Biz. I'm your host, Bubba Startz, and with me today from Veteran Made, Carey Kight. Carey, welcome to the show.
Good morning, Bubba. Thanks for having me. Happy to be here, man.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Obviously, with our relationship and my position as Director of Marketing and PR for Operation Combating Veteran Suicide, I'm very excited about hearing more about your company and talking about some future endeavors, hopefully, that we get to work on together. But before we get into all that, Carey, I want to give you a few minutes here to give us a little bit of your backstory, and then we'll pick it up from there.
Yeah, certainly. Thanks again for having me. Excited to be here. Excited to see where this goes. Like you said, I'm Carey Kight. I'm co-founder of Veteran Made. We are a production company. We primarily specialize in documentary filmmaking, commercial campaigns, OLV campaigns. I have a background in omni-channel advertising and marketing campaigns. Worked for a couple of agencies out of New York City and running big campaigns for big brands out of New York. Spent some time in LA in the film industry before that as well. Quick and dirty on me. I was born and raised in San Diego, California. My dad's side of the family is from Columbus, Ohio. I moved here where I live now when I was about 13. So did 8th grade in high school in Columbus and then enlisted out of high school. My brother played Division III football. I was a pretty good football player in high school, ran track and played basketball as well. I was like all district in football. So not quite good enough to go D1, but still wanted to go play ball and wanted to not necessarily follow in my brother's footsteps, but I got exposure to Division III football from him, which for those that don't know, especially now in this age of NIL for the big colleges, for D3 football, D3 sports in general, you need an academic scholarship to go play at those schools. They don't give athletic scholarships, excuse me. And I didn't really take my grades very seriously in high school. I love to learn. I love to study. I love to read. I just didn't love doing homework and didn't love studying for tests. And so my grades weren't great and they weren't really good enough to get the academic scholarship. So I did ultimately decide to enlist in the Air Force. Wanted to give myself the opportunity to, become a little bit more independent and interdependent with my family, not rely on loans or parents to pay for college. Wanted to go get some experience. I always say now that, it was kind of a 3-pronged approach for me to enlist. It was certainly one part patriotism. 9/11 happened when I was in 8th grade and Oliver Stone's World Trade Center came out when I was in high school and certainly was an impact on me to go serve. But then the other piece was to go have an adventure, right? To go out and experience life and experience difficulty and to experience some interesting things. And the military is a great way to do that. And then the third piece was to get the GI Bill and to get those benefits that service members get to then go on to college once I was ready to study the things that I wanted to study. I always wanted to be a filmmaker. I was obsessed with movies and TV as a kid. I wanted to be an actor initially. And then in high school, instead of studying and doing my homework, I was reading screenplays and I was watching behind the scenes, making of documentaries on DVDs and things like that. So for me, the Air Force was always something I was just going to do for one enlistment and then get out and use the GI Bill, which is ultimately what I did. Got out and came back to Columbus and went to Ohio State for 1 year. And the film studies program at Ohio State was great for what it is, which is kind of more of a film, like training to be a film critic, in film theory. So I love that I got 1 year of that, but ultimately I was a doer and a maker. I wanted to be a doer and a maker. So I ultimately transferred to Full Sail University down in Orlando, which is an accelerated Bachelor of Fine Arts program in screenwriting down there. And so I got to go down and actually learn the craft and learn to make and create, and went to LA from there. And then from LA went to New York City. And then now we're back here in Columbus, and we can kind of dive into any of those business aspects that you want on that journey. But that's the long and the short.
Yeah, well, and you got a really well-rounded life, right? From your experience in the military and going to a few different schools. One where obviously the Ohio State University, one of the biggest athletic schools in the country, but probably underrated as an academic institution, right? I would think because any of those schools that get that kind of notoriety with their athletic programs often get overlooked in that. And I can't mention the university without mentioning Roy Hall Jr., who introduced us. So huge shout out to Roy for making the connection with us as well. The production world, and I want to dig into this a little bit deeper, and that's probably why you glossed over it right here at the end, because I find it very interesting what kind of brought you to being an independent now documentary filmmaker. You didn't start out necessarily making full-length films. You were more in the kind of made for brand work, because that's what most people do to pay the bill, right? And talk a little bit about that experience in Los Angeles first, and then we'll move on to your time in New York City.
Yeah, that's a great call. So, like I said, I was reading screenplays and watching behind the scenes making of documentaries on DVD extras back in the day, and so I wanted to be a narrative filmmaker. I wanted to be, a Quentin Tarantino or a Christopher Nolan, right? I think every good, arrogant film school student thinks that they can certainly walk that path, right? And so I studied screenwriting at Full Sail. While I was there, I wrote a couple of short screenplays to make some short films. I mean, the program at Full Sail, not to get too deep into it, but is great for military students. And one of the things that I learned there was, how do you write in order to make? Right. So I was in class with a lot of younger students. I was, 23, 24, I think probably 20. I guess I had turned 24, 25 when I had graduated. So I was older. So I really connected with the professors, and a lot of the other students in my cohort were younger, right out of high school, or a couple years removed from high school. And they were writing these large spec scripts, right? They, whether it's the sort of like, Marvel Cinematic Universe or the DC universe or high concept sci-fi, these things that we're all interested. I love that stuff too. I'm really interested. But what I learned connecting with those professors there is write what you can actually make, right? And so for me, that was thinking through the lens of independent film, whether that's like self-financed or not financed at all, just working with people who are willing to work on a passion basis. So I wrote a couple of short films, short screenplays when I was at Full Sail, and one of them won a couple of awards through the online festival circuit, which was really cool. So I took those out to LA, and because I didn't have a production degree, I had a screenwriting degree. I immediately got on set in Los Angeles, and I became the first assistant director for a web series that ultimately didn't see the light of day. They didn't finish post-production, but I learned a tremendous amount about production. So that marriage of what are you writing, what's on the page, and then how does it get onto the screen? So obviously somebody else wrote that screenplay for the web series, but as the first assistant director, what I learned was how every department works on a film set. So the first assistant director sits at the center. They're not the center, but they sit at the center of every department on a film set. So they interface with talent, hair and makeup, wardrobe, art department, props, locations, grip and electric, camera department, and then the director themselves, as well as working for the executive producers and the writers, in order to make the film or the television series or the short film, whatever it might be. And so because I loaded bombs on fighter jets in the Air Force, I was lucky enough to deploy a couple of times. Lucky enough, I was stationed over in the UK. So I deployed to Bagram, Afghanistan a couple of times. And then we did NATO operations all over Europe. So training other European allies, as well as training with other European allies. And when you're on the flight line, loading bombs on fighter jets, you're working with crew chiefs. You're working with those are the mechanics, right? Who are in charge of the overall functionality of the aircraft. You're working with avionics. They're in charge of radar and electronics for the jet. You're working with the engines troops who are putting the engines on and in the aircraft and maintaining those engines. You're working with air to ground equipment. You're working with supply troops. You're working with all of these different organizations kind of within this larger flight line organization. And you don't touch any of the other departments work, right? But you have to work with them and alongside of them. So when I got onto this set working on this web series, and I was, this kind of first assistant director who was in charge of making sure that every department got what they needed, I saw the flight line. I saw what I did in the military, and I brought that framework to bear on that experience. And very quickly, I saw what worked and what I could bring from that framework. And then I dispensed with some of the other things that might not necessarily work on a film set. But the one-to-one was remarkable. That is when I started to really fall in love with production as well. So I still had the ambition to take my short screenplays and direct them and produce them and turn them into short films to then put on the festival circuit. And I still had that artistic approach, but I did have this now grounding and understanding of how production actually works, how you take the page, how you take the script and you turn it into something tangible that you put into the camera and then put into a computer system and edit, right, for a final product. So that initial narrative experience out in Los Angeles was incredible, because I got to really learn how to actually make, right, and how it works. And it's not just art, right? It's this sort of marriage of art and science and logistics. So not to spend too much time on that, but I did that web series. And then I did another feature length film with that same crew, where I was the unit production manager and second assistant director on a feature film. Then I took that crew back to Los Angeles, and we made those short films that I wrote, and we put them out on the festival circuit and did pretty well. The problem was I was waiting tables, tending bar, racking up debt, right? Like trying to get an agent, at 25 years old. I'm not going to be Chris Nolan. I'm not going to be Quentin. I'm not going to be any of these guys quite yet. And so I stumbled into branded content and advertising because I got hired by somebody out of New York City to crew up and direct a branded content piece for the Disney Channel. And we had wrap beers, me and that producer. And he said, "What are you doing, man? What do you want to do?" And I said, "Well, I want to do this for a living. Like I want to do this all the time." And he was like, "You got to work in advertising, because if you work in advertising, you do this 5 days a week, right? Monday through Friday, you're working with experienced crews. You're working with experienced directors of photography. You're working with experienced producers. So you can learn the craft, right? And get better at doing this every day. And then you can continue to make your independent films on the weekends for pizza and beer. You don't have to pay crews and DPs to come in and shoot the artsy fartsy stuff that you want to make, because we're all working for the man 5 days a week. We want to do something fun on the weekends." And so that's what I did. I moved to New York City. Longer story. My now wife and I reconnected, and that's why I moved to New York City. And then I still waited tables and tended bar to work my way into the industry as I freelanced. But I took that narrative experience. I took that experience from Los Angeles and film school to New York City, and I started to cobble together a portfolio. So sometimes I was writing scripts and I was writing questions, for a branded documentary director, and I would sit next to him and I would help him craft the questions as he interviewed people. And then I learned how to shoot B-roll, right? To the big thing in advertising is say, right? So if somebody says something in a script, whether it's a branded documentary or a commercial script with voiceover, you then need to see the thing. So that director started to teach me how branded content comes together, whether in documentary form or in more traditional sort of narrative commercial form. And so I was doing everything from associate producing to assistant directing to script writing. Sometimes they would let me direct some smaller pieces, and I started to cobble together a portfolio. And then I just made connections, man. I built relationships with people in New York City, and all of these different crews that I met, I would just stay connected to the people that I enjoyed working with, and I would just follow up. With this producer, it was Timing Studios at the time. It's now, I think, Dash Meredith, right there in Manhattan. And I would literally just go down to his office and knock on his door and say, "What do you got? Do you have anything coming up? Anything I can help with? Anything I can work on?" So I spent a couple of years doing that and got connected into this network of people that were making branded content and commercials. And then one thing led to another. And I worked at another smaller agency where we were the agency of record for NASCAR. And then we did a lot of commercial content for Fox Sports and the NFL back when they had NFL on Fox on Thursday nights before it went to Amazon. And again, while I was at that agency, I did a little bit of everything, a little bit of directing, a little bit of writing, a lot of producing. And I just learned how campaigns work, how it works to function within this large brand ecosystem. I mean, NASCAR, it's not technically one of the big four leagues, but it's probably the fifth, right? In terms of sports leagues, huge fandom, obviously working with celebrity talent and just kind of learning how all of that stuff works. I spent a lot of time standing next to Dale Jr. There in the pits, because he's working broadcast and we would just chop it up because we were just all out there in production. And so it was really cool to develop those relationships and meet people and understand how brands work and what they need, and how agencies work and what they need, and how a production company fits into that. At a high level, you have brands, you have agencies, and then you have production companies. And so a brand works with an agency and an agency works with a production company, and you're all trying to bring a campaign to life. So I spent a few years there, and then ultimately left and did a couple of freelance things on my own, and then got picked up by a small agency, about 15, 20 people during COVID, and worked my way up there that first year to become the head of production at that agency. And we were working with Procter & Gamble and launching brands for Gillette. We worked with a lot of startups. We worked with a lot of like healthcare and self-care. We worked with a lot of CPG brands, launched products for Fireball whiskey, and we launched a veterinary care brand. We did like lots of really cool things. And I just further developed my understanding of how brand storytelling works. And during that period, that's when I started the podcast Veteran Made, because COVID happened and we're all sitting in our homes working remotely like this, right, on Zoom or Teams or Google Meets or whatever it is. And I'm a big podcast guy. I love to learn through listening to conversations. And I always thought like, man, Joe Rogan flies people to his studio, right, to have conversations. But a lot of people during COVID started doing it remotely like this. And so I was like, how did I get here? How did I do this? How did I figure out how to translate my skills from the military and transition into this industry I always wanted to be in, albeit in a slightly different capacity than I thought. And I thought the best way to do that was to talk to other veterans who had done similar things. So I just started a podcast on Zoom, called it Veteran Made, right? I wanted to feature other veterans who had made stuff, whether that was like authors and filmmakers who made films and wrote books, or whether that was other veterans who were scaling their own brands, because I now had that understanding of marketing and business and brands. And so I started interviewing a lot of veterans who were scaling their own apparel brands or CPG brands or whiskey brands or cigar brands or kind of you name it, right? And then I also was talking to other artists who were veterans, authors and filmmakers and poets and different photographers and different people. And so I just started parallel pathing these things as I was working at this agency and also building the podcast. And then, it just got to a spot where I was like, I developed this really interesting sort of in-house model at both of these agencies that I was at, where we could, as an agency, bring production in-house and save some of those dollars that we would otherwise use to RFP other large production companies. Like I built this skill set coming from the production side. And so that's what we did while I was there. And then I thought to myself, man, I can just do this myself as well. And my wife is in the industry and she was working at other agencies, building her own path along these lines and building a similar skill set. So we ultimately came together a few years ago and left our respective agencies and then brought everything under the Veteran Made brand and kind of pooled our portfolios together. And now that's what we're doing. We function as a production company. We certainly work with agencies who RFP us on behalf of brands. And then we also work directly with brands because we have that agency and that production experience. And so really, to sort of long-winded, but to sort of button it, it's like bringing all of the skills and experiences to bear and then seeing how they work together and then carving that path forward.
And I think kind of tying that back to your service is that, yes, you're building skills. Not all the skills that you learn in the military, in the work that you're doing, are very applicable to the civilian world, right? But the systems and the way things operate, because you have such a large, the organization of the military, you have to have systems that you can plug any person into that walks them through. That's why you have basic training and then it goes into schooling and these systems work. And it feels like that specifically worked very well with how your brain is wired, that you were able to now take that application and to apply it to every single job or, project that you've worked on over the course of your career now, and then continuing to apply that not only in your own brand, but for other brands, and continuing to evolve this. Like, I'm really excited to see where you continue to go, because you are such a lifelong learner as well, that your best work is always ahead of you. Like, it doesn't matter what you've done, your best stuff is always going to be ahead of you because you're learning. And I don't know that I think everyone has that inside of them, but not everyone stays motivated to continue doing those and getting better at what they're doing. So very proud of you. It's not an easy thing to branch out and to start your own company, right? To leave the security of an agency or a production company that's kind of paying you that consistent, wage and salary, to move out onto having to get your own work. But you've spent a long time building all of this up to being ready and poised for the success that you're having now.
Yeah, I thank you. I think, so two things. One, you talk about systems, right? The biggest system that military veterans have, that seems obvious that they might not realize translates so well, is OJT, on the job training. Now, the trades have this, right? If you go into the trades in the civilian world, whether it's union or otherwise, you have a system of OJT. So it's not unique to the military, but in this context, the military, we have OJT. It's on the job training. So that lifelong learning is built into you from the moment you start boot camp, all the way through to the end of your career. I have friends right now that are getting ready to retire and are still going to schools in the military to learn and apply right up until, they retire. So that is built into the military framework and the systems. And so that was the biggest thing that I translated over to the civilian world and working in this particular industry is, you're right. I'm constantly learning, and I constantly look at everything as training, and I look at it as on the job training. So the stakes are a little bit higher, obviously, because if you're learning on the job and trying to catch up, quote unquote, from the time missed in college and the time missed not getting internships and all of these things that military, veterans tend to miss when they jump right into college and then jump right into industry. Is that idea of on the job training and constantly learning. The other thing is relationships. I think there's a big misnomer. I think the civilian population in this country assumes that military veterans are only good at showing up on time early, right? On time is late. On time is actually 15 minutes early. Hence why you and I were able to chop it up a little bit, because I was early to this, always am. Showing up early, on time, and following orders, that is not actually what we're trained to do. We're actually trained to make our own decisions and work with the teams alongside of us in the military to accomplish the mission. So yeah, there are certainly standards, there are expectations, there are rules of engagement, there are all of these things that you can and cannot do, but that provides a sandbox, that provides a framework. Within that, leadership in the military empowers service members to make their own decisions within that framework, and build relationships with other people. Now, sometimes those other people are your rank or below, and sometimes they're above your rank. So I learned very early that as long as you are respectful, you stand at parade rest or attention, you can have a conversation with a 4-star general, which I did a lot. I would have to brief pilots on the packages that we loaded in Afghanistan. We would do, my job in the Air Force loading bombs, you had to stay qualled monthly. So you were constantly getting qualified on different packages that we were loading on airframes or might potentially load on airframes. And we would have what's called dog and pony shows where, the wing level or the group level commanders and senior enlisted would come in and observe you actually training and qualifying on these. And then you had to debrief them. They would ask you questions and then you would have to give answers. You have to stand in front of the boards. So I was capable very early and very young speaking to people that were older, more experienced, and had more rank than I did. So then when I got into this industry and I had to go brief C-suites on a pre-production or on a creative concept, I just treated them like people. I was respectful, of their status and their rank within the organization, but I just treated them like people. And I would observe a lot of my colleagues and coworkers, oh my gosh, the CEO is going to be on this call. We got to be buttoned up. And it's like, yeah, of course we got to be buttoned up, but we can just treat him or her like the person that they are. And so, I benefited from that tremendously. I also had some instances where there were clients that I was too friendly with, and the people I was working for didn't like that. And so that's something that you sort of have to feel your way through. But I think you're right. It's systems, but it's also those relationships that you're building with the people you're working with and the people you're working for.
So you're working now with your wife. You guys are in your business together. Are there any challenges into working with your spouse, kind of both coming from, and I don't know what her background is in the industry. I'm assuming maybe a little bit different and a little bit different side of that. Challenges or on the flip side of that, advantages to working with your spouse?
No, there's no challenges at all. It goes perfectly. We never disagree.
Smart man.
No, we do. We disagree well. It happens. But there are challenges and there are advantages. She actually comes from a non-traditional background as well. She studied journalism and new media in college. She's very creative. Was very creative early. She got out of college right at the financial crisis, and she went into education. That was her master's degree, was in education, and so she was a teacher for a long time, and then she worked in operations. Administration at different schools, and worked at one in particular in Brooklyn, which is why I moved to New York City. And while I was there, we had, again, it's a long love story. I can provide you with some links to podcast episodes that I've done and that we've done together for those that might be interested. But one of the things I encouraged her, I was like, hey, you were super creative back in the day, and I think you are super creative. I think you'd be really good at this. Would you like to do some of this together? So she came onto a couple of sets that I was working on early in my time in New York. And I was very encouraging of her to step in and give creative feedback and give creative input. And then she was also assertive enough to step in and do that on her own. And then we sort of stumbled through those initial, jobs together. Like what's the breakdown of responsibilities? Where do I jump in and take control? Where does she jump in and take control? I was encouraging her to be creative. She has this operations background. I really wanted to be more of a director on the creative side. She was like, well, I can fit in with production because I do logistics through this operations role at the charter school. But then we very quickly went like this, where she just really took off with her creative output. And I started to just continue to fall in love with the production side. So we actually kind of went like this, where I went more production and logistics and the marriage of creative and logistics through, becoming the head of production at this other agency. And then she started to work in more of a creative capacity at the agencies that she was working at. And that culminated in her directing primarily. So she would direct brand films and brand documentaries, whether they were 1-2 minute films or 8 to 15 minute films. Then she did a feature length documentary that was brand funded and distributed by Tubi about 3 WNBA players that they were navigating the end of their collective bargaining agreement a few years ago. And she made this feature length film as a director, as an EP. And it was after that film that we got together. As business partners. We were married at the time, but we got together as business partners. And so we've really been, I'm sort of, production, logistics, high level creative input. And then she's more of that boots on the ground creative driver as our flagship director. And so because we love each other and we respect each other and we trust each other and we live together and we work together, there's a lot of positive creative tension as we move through various projects and various productions. And we just get better every time, and we get better kind of within every project. We're working right now on a product launch campaign for a brand that I've worked with in the past and she hasn't worked with before. So this is a relationship that I have. And now she's coming in and she's driving the creative and I'm driving the relationship and the logistics. And then we're bringing, some of my crew members that I have experience with and some of her crew members that she has experience with. And we're just very clear about roles and responsibilities up front. what are you responsible for? What am I responsible for? I'll say, here are the things that I need from you on this cadence. Does that cadence work for you? Yes, it does. Amazing. And then I have just learned to hold her accountable the way that I would hold any other director accountable through, hot sheets and checklists and, these production logistics items. And so we just stumble forward and get better every time. I think one of the massive advantages is how well we know each other. Right. And so like, I know how she's feeling and what she's thinking, she knows how I'm feeling and what I'm thinking as well. And so we can read those things and just put them on the table and talk about them and say, hey, here's what I'm thinking. You're thinking, yep, that's what I'm thinking. Great. All right, let's move forward, this way, or let's pivot, or let's do kind of whatever needs to be done. Yeah.
I'd love to hear about some of your recent works, on the creative side for you guys, the stuff that you're producing in-house and really the passion projects that you have. And hear about a couple of those before I let you get out of here today.
Yeah, no doubt. So like I said, she directed that feature documentary about the WNBA. So after that, we got RFP'd by Octagon, which is a big sports agency, to develop a docuseries for the WNBA and Delta Airlines. So one of the big things on the collective bargaining agreement for the WNBA and their union was charter travel. And so that was a big piece of Andrea's film, was the fact that the league needed charter travel. So they ultimately got that through their collective bargaining agreement. So then Delta Airlines became that partner. And so this agency had worked with Andrea previously, loved her work, obviously knew that the film was successful. 2 of the players were going to be featured in this documentary series. So we did that about a year ago, launched a 3-part, 15 minutes per episode docuseries about these 3 WNBA players, talking about the past, present, and future of themselves and the league itself and the partner. All kind of, the wrapper was the partnership through Delta Airlines. So that ran on In-Flight Entertainment last year and into this year, and then lives on YouTube as well. I can provide you some links if folks want to watch that. Right now, like I said, we're launching a new product for a big brand. Can't say what it is because it's not, public yet, but it will be after our campaign. And then, we're working on developing a few different documentaries in both spaces, in the women's sports space, as well as the military veteran space. So Andrea, she played college golf at Ole Miss. So she's a female athlete herself, an elite female athlete. We play golf together. She's obviously a lot better than me, and I will never beat her. But it's great to get on the course with her because for 2 reasons. One, she's just tells me what I need to be doing instead of the things that I think I need to be doing on a golf course. And then she never gets mad at me because she's always too busy getting mad at herself. Elite golfers are funny that way. They get so mad at themselves. And she's like, oh man, I'm 2 over. And I'm like, I'm 30 over. What are we talking about here? Don't be mad. That's ridiculous. No, I've gotten better. I'm like a 19 handicap. I'm getting better. But no, I shoot in the low 90s and she shoots in the low 70s. But it's a lot of fun. So we're focusing on women's sports, and then we're focusing on kind of military and veteran stories. So I can't talk about a lot of the projects that we're trying to develop right now, just because they're not real yet. The way it works, especially when you're going to the streamers and you're working with some of these big leagues, is there's multiple people trying to make multiple documentaries at the same time. Sometimes there's overlap. So like, we're bringing a project to the WNBA right now, and they're like, we got 2 other production companies doing the same thing. So we have to navigate, essentially what amounts to a competition, right, to make sure that our version of it is the one that they want to approve and move forward with. And then there's a few organizations and people in the military and veteran space that I'm working on developing some documentaries about as well.
Awesome stuff, Carey. Really insightful, I think, for any young filmmakers or really anyone in the creative arts and just really any industry. I think your story is brilliant. It seems like you've always had a bit of a plan and have continued to enact that plan over time, and realizing that it's a long game that we're playing, right? Life is a very long play, and it doesn't need to be all done overnight. You can piece by piece get better at what you're doing, and eventually you're creating films and doing what you dreamed of as a 22-year-old fresh out of the military. You're doing those things now for some of the biggest brands on the planet, and I think that is inspiring to young people out there, and maybe it's inspiring in the fact that your dreams can start small. I think that was my one big takeaway, is like, write what you can make. And for me, being kind of an unscripted content, I'm not going to crown myself as a king or anything, but that this is what I do. I've developed over 1,000 episodes in 2 years' time of unscripted content. And it wasn't a dream of mine to be a filmmaker or any of those things, but now it's becoming part of that, where it's like, okay, this is great. The podcast is awesome, but we could be doing more to tell those stories. So I think that's a long-winded way of me asking for an internship with Veteran Made, but we can talk about that off camera. Carey, thank you so much for taking some time out of your day for me today, and thank you for being part of the scene.
Bubba, thanks for having me, man. I really appreciate it.